Hey folks, it's David with Streaming Relativity, home of the Astro DNA Observatory. So November was a really tough month, at least in my area. We had historic drought here. We had fires. Thank goodness this is all taken care of with the snow and the rain that we've gotten. And I also had a bunch of personal obligations, including a very important wedding of my son David and my daughter-in-law Caitlin. Love you guys, wishing you the very best. I also had to travel on business, which is not so pleasant. But I am back on track, and Jupiter is in focus. You may recall that I actually acquired the Celestron C11 XLT specifically for planetary imaging. And, Jupiter's reaching opposition on December 7th, so the weeks surrounding this event are really excellent image window. And for those who are not aware, opposition simply means that the Earth will sit directly between Jupiter and the Sun, and therefore Jupiter will appear largest and brightest to amateur astronomers. It's a great time to image. So this video is going to focus on the initial images that I've captured of Jupiter, which I did entirely in the last week of November. I'll share a little bit of my workflow using SharpCap and a new tool which was recommended by subscribers of the channel called AstroSurface, and I think the results are fair. And we'll take a closer look at several different images, but the very first thing I needed to do was really just ready my rig with the proper cameras for this activity, and that included two planetary cameras, the ASI678 and the ASI482. But I also experimented with the trusty old ASI 1600mm Pro, as well as my ASI 2400MC Pro. And again, I'm using the C11 XLT. It's not an edge model, it's your basic model. I bought it used. I think it was a great, perfect for planetary, but as you can tell from some of my prior videos, it really did a great job with some DSOs. So after getting the camera adapters set up for the 2-inch draw tube, I had a little bit of cleaning to do on my IR UV cut filter. I included this footage simply because I think a lot of people are afraid to to clean their optics, the surfaces of their sensors or their filters. But I use an air gun. I have a shop air compressor, so I generally you can blow off most dust, loose particles, real easily. And then if you get a couple stubborn spots, I use a Q-tip and a little bit of alcohol. And so around dusk, once I was set up, I went back out to the observatory and I opened the shutter to let the telescope acclimate and prepped my PC by loading all the software that I'm going to be using. I use Nina and for primarily for my plate solving, but then I switched to SharpCap for all of my capturing. And so let's go ahead. Let's take a look at what my workflow looked like. Okay, so yeah, I start the session in Nina with the ASI 1600 mm Pro camera connected, and of course I'll first run an autofocus from the home position, which is generally pointing towards Polaris. I then pull up Stellarium, I select Jupiter as my target, and I import that into the framing wizard and run a slew in center. And the last time I imaged Jupiter was with a 35mm Minolta film camera. So even this exercise, this pointing exercise, is extremely rewarding for me to see Jupiter come into focus and its moons. And it inspired me actually to do some wide field shots over the course of this of the week, which I'll share those images with you shortly. But once I had Jupiter centered, I swapped out the 1600 for the ASI 678 MC camera, which is a planetary camera. This particular camera has very small pixels, about 0.15 arc seconds in resolution. So this is the first time that I imaged Jupiter with SharpCap, and I'm not a SharpCap expert, but I am a fan. And so for the first night, all I cared about was experimenting with exposure and gain settings to make sure that I'm able to get a decent low noise image of Jupiter, stream of images of Jupiter going. I wanted to be somewhere in the 60 frames per second rate. And then I wanted to play with the sharpening adjustments, specifically the Gaussian wavelet sharpening, as well as the image adjustments that include, of course, brightness, gamma, different colored channels, and saturation levels. The magic is clearly in the sharpening and the adjustments, and having a good firm understanding of Gaussian wavelet sharpening, what that's all about, is, I think, very important to getting a successful result. The bottom line is that these algorithms are able to decompose the image into wavelets of feature. Think of that as granularity. There could be very fine features all the way up to more coarse features at level 4, let's say. And you have the ability to adjust the sharpening at those levels and to denoise the overall image using this control. Is there a right or a wrong way to do this? Honestly, I don't know. What I do know is that it's remarkable the range of results that you can get through experimentation. And I think that's really what this comes down to when you're using this incredible tool, this live planetary stacking tool in SharpCap. And the beautiful part about this is that at any time you can just snap off a PNG image of your live stacked planet, and that's exactly what I did on the first night. I just really focused on getting to know the tool, specifically with Jupiter, and given the conditions, my inexperience with the software, I was able to produce some very impressive results, at least for me and for my family and friends. So here's the first pass, which I thought was a little bit dark. So I did another pass where I increased the brightness, and I think this is a pretty nice image of Jupiter. But I also took 1,000 images and stacked the best 400 using AstroSurface, and this is what I got. Hard to tell for me which one is better. Let's compare all three. So obviously they're all soft. They could be better, but for a first night, I am not disappointed. Let's see what happens in the second night. Well, for starters, I wanted a wide field shot because I wanted to feature the moons of Jupiter. I have 3 of the 4 here, and this harkens back to the day of 35mm film for me. I absolutely love being able to see that planetary system and the Galilean moons orbiting Jupiter, and all too often we get caught up in the details of Jupiter's surface, but we forget that it is a wonderful celestial object. Speaking of the surface, I think the second night, this live stack is very elegant. I really like its presentation, and the fact that we catch I.O. probably 20 minutes before it becomes eclipsed by Jupiter. I.O. is going to be traveling behind Jupiter. Makes this, for me, a really rewarding image. But let's face it, this is really more of an artistic interpretation, meaning it's very soft. It almost has a watercolor feel to it. So what I did is that evening I had taken around 3,000 frames over a course of 2 minutes through the capture facility in SharpCap, and I brought that into AstroSurface, a tool that was recommended to me by a couple of subscribers. And here I'm just fiddling with it to try and understand its capabilities. I produced something that I pulled into GIMP and did some final adjustments on, and I will say that yes, okay, I have a sharper image. I have two of the Galilean moons, including Io approaching eclipse, and I think it is a better, sharper image. Still not where I would like it to be, and I decided that I needed to, continue my experimentation. So on the night of December 1st, I went out and I did another round of captures, and I will walk you through exactly how I used AstroSurface to get to a final result that I'm satisfied with. So I'm using version 3 of AstroSurface, and it allows me to open up a Sarah file, and in this case I'm going to open up the sequence that I captured with SharpCap on the 1st of December. And the first thing it's going to do is allow me to play a video, which is very interesting. This is each frame, and believe it or not, I can tell that the transparency was a little better on the 1st than it was on the 30th and on the 26th. And I can tell because I'm seeing, even in the raw images, I'm seeing details in the bands of Jupiter. And obviously we have also two moons, Io, very near to Jupiter. In fact, Io on this evening is going to cross over, so it will eclipse Jupiter itself, and it'll cast a shadow. And I ran a 4-hour time lapse to capture that, so we'll be looking at that in a little bit. But anyway, this is your starting point. So you've got the Sarah file imported, and the first thing that I did is an analyze register with no rotation. Okay, so in this case, it's going to ask you to detect the planet, which it will automatically do, and it has done here. And you can also alternatively draw your own region of interest if you'd like. And it has a numbering system which allows you to kind of follow along in the steps here. But just recognize that the first step is going to do is register or align these things, and there are two options here, two algorithms. We're going to use algorithm C, which deals with planetary alignments, and we know that we have 3,111 images here, and we're going to tell it to analyze those images. So this will take a minute or two. Okay, very good. After it is done analyzing, it shows you a graph of the quality of the frames, and you can either conveniently choose different cutoffs, or you can use this bar to decide exactly what cutoff you'd like. And I like to go to around 40%. So in this case, that will, let's just leave it at 1256. This is going to give us roughly 1256 frames to stack. And you can say OK to that. And we're going to use a multi-point alignment. And you can choose the convenient setting. This is just going to determine the granularity of feature alignment, 64, 48, and the more alignment points, obviously, the longer the stacking is going to take. But for this level, I still don't think that this is a super fine capture, so I am going to stick with 48. I'm going to set those alignment points. And now we're going to stack, and in this case, we're going to name what we want this to be. And this can be any. And I'm going to make this aligned 2, because I have done this already. And we'll go ahead and we'll stack it out to a PNG. This will again take a minute or two. And so here we have our stacked image. And again, this is pre-sharpening, and all I'm looking for is some feature points here. And we obviously have our moons, we have our bands. I can see some interesting detail in the bands, but it's still far from where we want it to be. So what's our next move? Well, for me, I go to the white balance right away, because I just think it needs white balance. So you select the region of interest, and let's select this region of interest. I might even at this point do set my black and white point. Okay, so now we've got that taken care of. So after I set my black and white point, I generally just like to jump right into wavelets. And again, I'm learning this software, so there's much for me to learn. Okay, I'll provide a very brief orientation to these controls, and then we'll do a quick time lapse of the actual editing that I've done. But basically, there are three controls that affect deconvolution. One that operates at a global scale, one that operates in the high frequency zone, and the other in the low frequency zone. And we'll talk about each of these in a second. But before we do, there's also what is called a noise pre-filter, which analyzes your image and tries to identify high frequency noise that might be inherent in the source in your raw data, or applies a little bit of smoothing to that prior to the deconvolution algorithms. I generally keep this set around 0.5, and you will adjust all of this as you iterate on your image. The very first thing that we'll do is work on deconvolution at a global scale, and this Wiener deconvolution is a mathematical technique that's used for sharpening, and it essentially reduces overall blur, and it works globally on the image, and it does require a point spread function size in pixels as an input to its algorithm. And I find that given that my camera that I shot is 0.15 arc seconds per pixel in resolution, I have been setting this in the 2 to 3 range. I'm gonna bring it up to 3 for now, so that you can see the effects. Now that's the point spread function pixel size. So any of the deconvolution or sharpening that's going to happen here is going to happen at that scale. And so if we begin to increase this, let's say we go up to 3, you'll notice right away that there has been some sharpening applied here. Okay, and that's with the noise pre-filter at 0.5. I can increase this all the way up to 5, 6, okay, and that's at 3. Now, if I were to increase this point spread function pixel size, you should start to see changes in the granularity of the sharpness. Okay, so this is for you to test and to play with. I like to begin at a 2.5 as my pixel size. Again, given my camera's 0.15 arc second in resolution, 2.5 is going to give me something around a 0.5 arc second scale for this deconvolution. And again, we can back off. Smaller iterative steps is probably best. But this is demonstrating for you. If we take the preview off, we see that there's some degree of sharpening that's already happened. Now, the next step is to perform wavelet sharpening and the high frequencies. Now, this is a Gaussian function, and it's going to isolate and sharpen just the high frequency wavelets, which would be the small spatial features that we see in our image. And the size control is a relative control. So, we could say, hey, focus on level 1, 2, or relatively higher levels of detail here. So you can see already this is at 200% strength, right? So this is going to determine the scale that it'll operate on. This is the strength of the sharpening that will be applied. It is set to 200 by default, and I think that that's a good thing in the sense that as you are increasing your wavelengths, your scale, you'll notice that it suddenly gets to a point where, all right, now it's starting to look a little, I'm starting to see artifacts and noise. Now, there's a couple things we can do. The simplest thing to do is we can decrease the strength of this effect, and it will, as you can see, begin to decrease the effect. Now, I like to use these small features, little storms and such, to determine whether or not I am at the right level here. And I'm going to just back off a little bit because, again, I believe that gradual is better than all at once. But at any rate, this is, again, I can increase the noise pre-filter to smooth it out a little bit if I want, but I really like this 0.5 setting. I think it's pretty darn close. Okay, so you now understand that the high frequency operates on these finer details within your image. What about the low frequency wavelengths? Well, that's going to work on broader regions like the bands themselves. So, and the strength is by default very low here. Let's go ahead and see what the effect of just increasing the scale to 1. Let's take a look at that. 0, 1. Note immediately we have a much sharper low frequency bands here. And if I go to 2, still looking pretty reasonable. 3, 4, and then it's really just cutting off at this point. So why don't we stick at 1 for a moment, and let's see what happens if we increase the strength. Yeah, we start to get to a spot where we get some very interesting, depth in the bands here, and look at how this starts to show some finer and finer detail. So this is just at a high level. Now there's some noise reduction. There are some algorithms here that the documentation doesn't recommend using. I'm not sure. I have not played with this yet, but I'm going to assume that this is just some additional noise reduction, smoothing. As you can see, it's smoothing. If we zero that out, it's sharper again. And there are a couple different adaptive algorithms that they're using, but clearly there's a smoothing effect here. And if we zero it out, we're back to a sharper image. At any rate, this is how wavelets are used. So I went ahead and I spent, I don't know, a good 20 minutes just playing around with wavelets and applying one pass. I only did one iteration, and I know that this deserves more than one iteration. I have more to learn about this tool, but I also did some adjustment to color saturation, and got to a point where I felt the image was really nice. So I saved it out, and let's take a look at it. Wow, that's an awesome image. I really enjoyed capturing this data. I really enjoyed making this video, and I hope you did too. And if you like astronomy and all things astrophotography, go ahead, subscribe. You're going to love the channel. And to all my subscribers, thank you very much, and I will see you all on the next video.